Thank you all for joining us today on National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So we have a very distinguished panel that would like to share some information with you today.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Nicole Haig. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I've been in practice here in Atlanta for over 20 years. As an emergency medicine physician, we actually are at the forefront of the medical aspect of human trafficking. A lot of times victims are brought into our emergency departments and we don't know that they're victims of human trafficking. And so I found this to be a very interesting topic, and I just wanted to share some information to make you aware of this topic and some things to look out for in your daily life. So what is human trafficking? I mean, we talk about it all the time. You know, people think, oh, you know, girls are being sold into having sex and they have to have pimps and they're prostitutes, and that is a part of it. But human trafficking is actually a very broad topic that includes recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring people, and it's all done under deception. These people, these young people, children, men, women, are all given the impression that they're going to be doing something. May it be working for someone in their home, or someone promises them a modeling job, or someone says, you know, you're an illegal alien, we're gonna get you work so that you can provide food to your family. The premise is always deception, deception, deception. And so how do you, once they get these people, then you have to figure out how do they keep them? How do these traffickers keep these people under control? Well, they do it either through fraud or through violence, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So there are different forms of trafficking, and I didn't really know this as well until I started researching it. You can have sexual exploitation, which is what most of us think of when we think about human trafficking, but there's also forced labor, debt bondage. So if someone says, okay, I'm gonna help get you somewhere and I'm gonna pay for your ticket, but then you owe me and you have to work off the price of that ticket, or you have to work off me paying for your rent, that is a form of human trafficking. You also have domestic servitude. There are people who are brought in from other countries or even from other states, and they'll say, okay, I'm gonna bring you in as an au pair and you're gonna take care of my children. Well, those people think that they're coming for regular jobs, especially if they're not here legally, and then once they go into the home, some of these people are working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, and getting paid $100, if even that much, and sometimes they're not getting paid at all. The people will just say, you know what, I'm paying for your food, I'm paying for your shelter, you work for me indefinitely. There's also organ removal. We hear more and more about that now, where people are being captured, their organs are being taken out of their bodies, and then those organs are sold on the black market, and that's happening all over the world, including the United States. Forced begging. Sometimes we see children who will be on the street, or even adults who are on the street, and they're begging for money or just anything that people will give them. Well, a lot of times, those children especially are being put out there by adults. They're also being trafficked. Child soldiers. We don't usually see that in the United States, obviously, but in certain continents, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, children are being put out there to work as soldiers. They're being kidnapped from their families and put out there. That is another form of human trafficking. And then forced marriage. A lot of us don't really have to deal with that here in the United States, but that is an issue in many other continents. So this is a very, there's steps to this trafficking process. It doesn't just happen. There's an act. You actually have to force people through recruitment, transport, harboring them, and then their means. How do you keep them there? You have to coerce them. Especially for young people, they'll say, we'll go after your family if you don't stay with us. And no one wants to see their family threatened, and so they use coercion to keep those people from running away, especially young children. Why is this going the wrong way? Here we go. how many people does this actually affect? You know, we see things on television and people are like, well, yeah, I know that's a problem, but really, how big a problem is it really? Well, none of us really know. But as of now, the statistics are pointing towards upwards of 50 million people who are living in modern-day slavery. Modern-day slavery is used interchangeably with human trafficking. Those terms are used interchangeably. And a lot of them are, they are brought in, almost 20 million people, they're thought, are brought in to work for companies where they're forced labor and they may or may not be making any money at all. Some people are working in domestic servitude, as I discussed. Other people are in sexual exploitation, which could be pornography, it could be prostitution, it could be anything that falls under that. And then people who are forced into marriage who don't want to be married to those people, or better yet, don't even have a choice. And that happens for men and women. Please understand, we usually think that this is an issue for only females, but the reality of it is that men are also victim to human trafficking and modern-day slavery. So when you break it down, how does this actually break down? The reality of it is it's thought that 50% of human trafficking falls under sexual exploitation, while almost 40% falls under forced labor, criminal activities, 6%, begging, and then forced marriages, and it goes down accordingly. What is sexual exploitation? It's when vulnerable people, women and men, are forced, tricked into a sex trade. And a lot of times people will say, oh, you know, let's just see how you are. You're just so beautiful. You're just so handsome. People are gonna love you. You can make some really easy money. And people fall victim to that, especially people who fall under circumstances where they don't have options otherwise. Their families may not have money. These people may not have jobs where they feel like they can live day to day. And this seems very attractive to them. Forced labor is, again, when someone has no choice over, you know, what work they do, how they're paid, and then people take control of you that way also. And domestic servitude, which we talked about a little bit already. What makes you at risk for being a victim? Because, you know, especially when you look at social media, you're like, that would never happen to me. I'm too smart for that. I don't know anybody who would fall for that. They're silly, they're stupid. It's not what it appears to be. These people are just as smart as everybody else who's in this room. They just may fall victim because of their circumstances. If you're homeless and you don't have anywhere to go and someone's offering you food and shelter, you're probably gonna really think hard about taking that food and shelter rather than being outside in 22-degree weather, right? Or dealing with the people who are gonna be outside who are going to try to steal from you or potentially hurt you or rape you or do anything else to you. So the streets are not an attractive place to be. If you fall victim to an addiction, addiction is real. Once you're an addict for your life. May it be to alcohol or some substance. And if you've lost your means to support that habit, if someone comes and offers you the means so that you can get that, may it be alcohol, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, they're gonna seem attractive to you. People who have mental health problems, if you're already depressed and you don't really have high esteem, and someone comes and tells you how wonderful and beautiful you are, and they make you feel better about yourself, you're gonna build a trust with that person and think that they have your best interests at heart, and that's how they pull you in. And here are some other examples. If you haven't been able to find employment, if you have learning difficulties and you just don't feel like you can survive on your own, if you're in debt, or if you've had a previous criminal record and you don't feel like you can get a job because every time you go in and do that application, people say, oh, well, we can't hire you. Right? Well, this is an opportunity to make money that you may otherwise, in your mind, feel you would never have the option or opportunity to have again. Why don't they run away? That's the other thing. People are like, well, they're not being tied down, right? No one's holding you. No one's holding a gun to your head every minute. Why don't they run when no one's looking? It's not that easy. For people who become victims of sexual exploitation or any type of exploitation, you almost develop this dependency on your exploiter. Because ultimately, and we'll see some of the social media stuff at the end, victims say they love these people, especially, if they've made them feel better in their minds about themselves, if they've given them nice clothes, if they've provided a home, if they've given them a family, quote unquote, that they've never had, they actually love the people that they're with. So emotionally, psychologically, those are the cuffs that exist, and those are the hardest to break. All right, so we took away some of the numbers. These are the human trafficking trends in 2020, here in Georgia specifically. And it's mostly sex and labor are the numbers that have been reported. And these numbers are being reported by people who are calling in to the different hotlines that exist. So this is people who volunteer the information. And again, we know that these numbers are significantly underestimated because these are just people who are reporting. During COVID, we saw some shifts in recruitment. Before it, just like in the public service announcement that we were watching before, people would go to Greyhound bus stations. Well, during COVID, everybody was inside and online. And so we saw a significant amount of recruitment over social media. May it be Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram. People are actually being recruited through that. People are also being recruited through game rooms where you go in and play video games, and then you build these relationships with people that you've never met, and you spend hours with them. You've never seen them before, and then they start to talk to you about other things. That's how we're seeing these recruitment trends changing. So we talked about that vulnerability. So here's some myths. And when I went through this, I thought this was really interesting. Human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. So people tend to think, it's only about the sex. No one's coming to me asking me to have sex. I would never do that. I know that's illegal. Well, an example like I used before, especially for young ladies and even young men, people will say, oh my gosh, you're so attractive, especially if it's on social media. You should be a model. I know someone who wants to, take you, and they're gonna make you the next whoever, amazing, you're gonna make millions, and that's how they pull people in. So most people are not getting recruited thinking that they're gonna go have sex. That's not how this starts, because people know better. They're being recruited through things that they're comfortable with. It could even be young men who are playing games, and they'll say, oh my gosh, you're such a great gamer, we can you can make money doing this, come meet us and we'll work this out for you. So people being recruited in ways that are comfortable for them, and so their guard is down because of that. The only way to reduce sex trafficking in children is to arrest all the perpetrators. That's actually not the only answer. Law enforcement has to be a part of this, but so do our families. I mean, the reason why children end up falling victim to this a lot of times is because they don't have the family support they need. Not that they don't have a family, because most of these children have families, but maybe their parents are split up and mom is working 2 jobs because she's trying to do everything to support her family, and she's not there for the kids as much as she would want to be. Families have to talk. You have to talk to your children about this. I have 4 children, and I've talked to them indirectly about this, but I've even realized now that I have to have this conversation with my children who are older teenagers, because it's not only about the children, teenagers, young adults are all being recruited and are falling victim to this. Children, especially traffickers, usually kidnap their children. That's actually not the case. Most children who are trafficked by people that they trust. So It could be someone who's a family friend, someone, like I said, who they've met online, someone who, where they go and hang out at a certain location, will come and meet them and will build that relationship, and the children will start to trust them. That's how they get to these kids, especially the children and the teenagers. They do snatch children, especially in other countries, but in the United States here, that's not how they're getting our teenagers. They're getting our teenagers by building a relationship with them first. So the stereotype is, you know, especially teenagers, if they get into this, they were just bad kids anyway, right? They're bad kids, bad things happen to bad kids. That's not, it doesn't matter if those kids made bad choices, they're children. Anybody who takes advantage of someone who's 18 or under is a child molester, is a child predator. There's no debate. No 17-year-old can tell you that they want to go with you. They don't have the right to do that, and you can't use that as an excuse. All children are equally at risk for trafficking. That is not the case. Again, we're talking about families. Children who tend to have stronger family bonds, whose parents communicate with them. And if I had the opportunity to talk to you guys on a larger scale, communication is actually the key to all of this. Communication will keep your children safer when it comes to drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, trafficking, everything. And is it perfect? Does it work 100% of the time? No, but it does help protect your child. And it's hard as a parent to have these conversations, I know, because sometimes even when I try to have these conversations with my children, especially my boys, they look at me like I have a horn coming out of my head. All right, what can you do? So you're here tonight, what can you do? Really, there are a lot of ways you can help combat this. One, talk to the people in your family. Talk to the children. Show them love. Make them aware, especially being on social media. Social media has opened up a world of predators that did not exist when I was a teenager. So I don't know what it's like to be on social media several hours a day and be meeting strangers. I would think that there's something quite odd about that. But that's like the norm for our teenagers. They talk to people they've never met, and they develop these relationships. My niece told me that her boyfriend, I was like, boyfriend? She's never met him. But in her mind, that's her boyfriend because she talks to him every day on social media. So we have to talk to our kids. We have to talk to our teenagers about these things. Another thing is, go to your representatives. This is something that needs to get everyone's attention. Our representatives need to make sure that they are putting laws in place that if someone is caught trafficking anyone, child, adult, that the penalties are stiff. On the flip side of that, for people who have been victims to trafficking and have been arrested, we also have to put laws in place to protect them so that they can restart their lives without criminal records. If you've been a victim of trafficking and you were caught, sex or drugs, selling drugs, you should not have that as a noose around your neck for the rest of your life.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brittany, and I am the North Region Care Coordinator for the Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia CSEC Response Team. More specifics on what I do and kind of who my team is just a little bit later. Just to open up this discussion, I want to get us in a better headspace and get us in the mindset to help better understand what the youth that I am serving on a daily basis may be going through. So if you are feeling comfortable or if you're not, it doesn't matter. Just sit there, close your eyes if you want. And as I read these imagined statements, we are just going to shift our minds to what our kids are going through in our communities. Okay, so imagine making a friend and being excited that they're wanting to introduce you to people in their life, only to find yourself in an unsafe situation, one you have no idea how to escape. Imagine being sexually assaulted repeatedly Imagine having to give all of the money you earn to someone else. Imagine being beaten for not making enough money. Our next scenario. Imagine you grew up in a house where everyone contributed to household income. Imagine for as long as you can remember, your parents allowed strangers to touch you and do inappropriate things to you. You always felt something was off, but you thought it was okay because you were just doing your part to help your family, and you knew rent would be paid if you continued doing this. Our next scenario. Imagine finding yourself living on the street with no safe place to go. Someone comes along and offers you a hot meal and a place to lay your head for the night, but you had to do something sexual with them in exchange for that. Would you take it? Our next scenario. Imagine being offered to be part of a group. You only had to be beaten one time and have sex with a couple people, and you would be taken care of for the rest of your life. Would you go through with that? And then our last scenario. Imagine meeting someone over the internet and ending up sending them explicit photos because you've grown a relationship with them. You've grown to trust this person. They compliment you often, and they've been asking for them for a while, for a period of time. These pictures are then posted online, and you're not okay with it, but you make money from it, and that's kind of nice, so you don't do anything about it. You then continue sending pictures because that someone seems happy with you for doing it, and you also like to make them happy. These scenarios that I have just listed are just a few of the many different scenarios that we see on a daily basis of the kids that we serve. The imagine statements that I just listed, they fall within the 5 different paradigms that we recognize as CSEC. The first one that I said was trafficker facilitated. The second one was family facilitated. Third one is what we call survival sex. Fourth was gang facilitated. And the fifth one was technology facilitated. So this leads right into what I am here to talk with you all about today, which is CSEC. What is CSEC? It stands for Commercial Sexual Exploitation, and it's also known as child sex trafficking. It's a form of human trafficking. It involves an exchange of sexual acts with a child for items of value or promise thereof. These items of value can include technology, clothing, food, shelter, transportation, etc. And I did have another activity. This is also busting a couple of myths, but Dr. Nicole actually hit on those myths. I will just include one other one though. So one myth that we see is youth always identify as victims with traffic, and that is simply just not true. Some of the specific reasoning for that is the scenario that I listed earlier. We see it a lot with survival sex, as well as family facilitated trafficking. These kids have known no other experiences in their lives but to take care of themselves, and they did whatever they needed to do to survive at the time. And so kids aren't going to see themselves as victims for that. Also, if they do have a trafficker or something, like Dr. Nicole was saying, these traffickers are smart these days. They're going to build relationships with these kids and build trusting relationships with these kids. And so these kids in turn are going to think that these traffickers are going to take care of them and they have their best interests at heart. So like I mentioned earlier, I am just going to tell you just a little bit more about my organization and what I do on a daily basis. So the Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia CSEC Response Team, our central mission is to serve as a central point of contact for victims of commercial sexual exploitation and the agencies that support them for a more coordinated and effective system response to commercial sexual exploitation. Child-serving organizations, community members, first responders, and others, or anyone in our community who wants to make a referral to us can do so 24/7 by visiting our website at www.cacga.org/referrals or they can call our 24/7 hotline at 1-866-363-4842. And for anyone here in the audience today, I also have additional materials listed on the tables outside that you're more than willing to take. So just in closure, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to learn more about human trafficking. It's a huge issue. And I just want to point out another common myth just at the very closing. Human trafficking is not a metro region issue. It is a state of Georgia issue. We're seeing it in our smallest cities as well as our biggest cities. So anything that you can do, whether that be volunteering your time, donating to your local human trafficking efforts, or just spreading the knowledge you learned tonight, it's very helpful in just getting everyone informed on the topic of human trafficking.
Good evening. I know it's a Wednesday, but I think we can get a little bit louder. Good evening. All right. Thank you so very much, Ms. Mills, for inviting the Department of Juvenile Justice. I'm DeBaja Coleman. I serve as the Director of Victim and Volunteer Services with the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice. I currently have been with the Department of Juvenile Justice now about 16 years. So I've seen a lot in those 16 years, from working in our facilities to working in our community offices to now being able to work with victims of juvenile crime and volunteer services. So I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about the Department of Juvenile Justice. I know we talked about human trafficking, but a lot of times people think with the Department of Juvenile Justice we just lock up kids, and that's not the case. We do a lot of other programming, and so as a department, we are an agency that really covers the entire state. As Ms. Brittany just mentioned, we cover the 59 counties in the state of Georgia, and part of that is 25 facilities. And then we also have probation offices throughout the state. So we have a total of 78 community service offices that provide probation services to youth that are in the communities. So I want to remind individuals that when we talk about youth who are in detention, they're your neighbors. They're the kids that come and, maybe have a sleepover at your house. They are the same kids that are in the schools with your children. They're no different. They've just made a mistake. And I also remind us that all of us were teens at some point in time. And some of us did some things that probably wasn't right all the time. So we have to make sure that we're giving these individuals the opportunity to redeem themselves and do better. And part of doing better is us as the community standing together. And human trafficking is one of those areas. Many of our youth that we see, they come into our facilities with a crime that they've committed. And as we start asking questions, then we start seeing that they may have been involved in trafficking. And thanks to our relationships that we have here on the panel, as well as others throughout the state, we're able to try to get some services for those youth. So I want you to think about a child that's in your life. A child that may be your own child, it may be a neighbor, it may be a niece or nephew. They also have the opportunity to get involved in trafficking. As we mentioned earlier, there's opportunities if we don't have that communication open. So I want you to keep that in mind. It's not some scary child or some scary trafficker. It's individuals that look like you and me every single day that get involved in trafficking. So with that being said, our mission for our Office of Victim Services is to really deliver compassion, a comprehensive services that are available to these individuals, and really support statewide. I think Georgia is one of those areas that we are high on human trafficking is because of the access that we have. You think about the airport. It's the largest airport in the world. And if you've been through the airport recently, it's busy. So people walking past and you won't pay attention to a male walking with another teenage girl. Oh, that's his child, or that's his niece. Or even two teenagers walking together. So sometimes we don't think about that. Kids can traffic others as well. So we also are advocacy. We provide supportive services for those youth who are commercially sex trafficked. Thankfully to our partnerships that we've had, we work on several task forces throughout the state of Georgia. So it's also about communicating. A lot of times in areas we are in silos. So you may have a child who was in, say, Rockdale that was trafficked. And if we don't communicate, that child could be in any other county in Georgia, and we would not know. So thankful to the networks and to the multidisciplinary teams that we created. We're able to communicate on a monthly basis, if not weekly basis, about these youth. So we've created lists to make sure that we're keeping up with them and seeing what they're doing and making connections between them and traffickers as well. We've also just looked at appropriate responses. We've had to change the language. For the longest, kids were, and prostitution was the title that was used. And we really had to change that to make sure that we're using trafficking, we're using victims. These youth under the age of 18, if they're involved in trafficking, they are a victim. They are a victim and need services. We need to be able to provide help. And many times working in the juvenile justice system, they don't see themselves as victims. So we have to get past some layers of anger and frustration, and they feel like this person that they're with loves them and they are supporting them. So we have to sometimes get past that to be able to get them help as well. In addition, as I said, many of these individuals, they're running away. When we talked about running away, I think Dr. Nicole mentioned it earlier, I've always said if a child keeps running away from home, either they're running from something or they're running to something. So we have to figure out what are they running from and what are they running to. And many times if they're running to something, it's not good. So being able to, as I tell parents, how many of you all in the room, by show of hands, are parents? Raise your hand, okay? How many of you all have nieces, nephews, children in your life? How about that, okay? Be nosy. I know as a child, at some point in time in my life, I was like, Mama, you ask too many questions, you're doing too much. But I appreciate that now as I see some of our kids who are involved in trafficking and the parents, they're trying to do their best, but at times they're not able to be there. So as a community, we got to get back to being a village. So I challenge you all. I'm excited to see you all here today, but make sure you go out when you leave here and go and tell 5, 10, 15 other people about the information that you learned tonight. So that information can spread. But open lines of communication, as we mentioned earlier, having that communication and putting your poker face on. Because our kids can tell you some things that will shock you. And if you have the shocked face, they're gonna shut down. So really putting your poker face on and listening and allowing them to open up. Now you may go in your bedroom later and cry and scream, but in front of them, let them know that there's no judgment. I don't care what you tell me, I love you, I'm here to support you, and I wanna get you the help. Because that's what many times the traffickers are using, that fear, as we talked about earlier. Oh, your parents are not gonna love you. You've been with all of these people, they're gonna think you're trash. They're not gonna want you anymore. And they always have to know that you can always come home. You can always be loved. You can always come back to the community, whatever that may be. Other ways that individuals are at risk is poverty, gang involvement as well. And those youth who have been sexually abused or physically abused, traffickers are able to see that. And they pull on that, they watch them. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately in detention, we see other youth recruiting other youth. And so unfortunately, many times our detention facilities are a prime facility for kids to recruit each other because they're sitting on the units, they're going to school together, and they're talking about, well, I bought this, and my hair was done this many times, and my nails was done this many times. And so it starts to sound good. And they don't realize what all they're getting involved in. So again, having that open lines of communication is gonna help you to be able to make right decisions and come to you as someone may be approaching them as well. So again, I remind you, please be nosy. If your child has a phone and you pay the bill, guess who? That's your phone. Check it. We have parents that we've told, cut the Wi-Fi off at night. Because what some kids are doing is you're going to bed, you sleep tidy, and they're on their phones, on social media, they're gaming, they're doing all those types of things. Well, cut the social media off or have them to turn their phones in at a certain times to help to reduce that. And we talked about open communication. Do check-ins. When we go out to dinner, one of the things I notice now is we at dinner and everybody's on their phone. Put the phone down, put it in the middle of the table, enjoy dinner, talk, get to know what's going on, and share what's going on in your life. Your children want to know that as well. As I said, be a village. If you live in a neighborhood with kids, get to know them because they may not tell their parents, but maybe you've built a relationship with them that they're willing to come and talk to you. So making sure we do that. Know resources. As I said, go out and tell 10 more people about this event tonight. Make sure they watch it when it's broadcast. But also check for different other events that may be going on around the state. and share that information so the people attend these events. That's how we get information out, is by sharing it with others and attending events, taking trainings that may be available to the community as well. And then, as I said, make sure we get rid of judgment. Again, you may see someone who may not be dressed that you would normally see somewhere, or maybe they have bruises and those types of things. And instead of, kind of looking at them sideways or judging, make sure we kind of just check in and see what may be going on. And you don't have to ask, certain questions. Just ask, how are you doing today? I've noticed something different. Is there something that you want to talk about, or somebody I can get you some help? Just kind of doing those check-ins. I think we've already mentioned just the definition of human trafficking. I want to touch in a little bit more. Unfortunately, what we see too many times is familiar, where family members are trafficking their children. We have kids who are paying the bills in their household, and it's based off of them paying them from trafficking. We have also started to see quite a bit of labor trafficking, kids who are working behind the scenes, up under the table, things such as that. So again, keeping your eyes open. Don't think that because, you're outside of Atlanta that it's not present. It is. It is. It's in your smaller communities. And because of, we talked about the airport, we're right here off I-20. You can get up and down, the United States through I-20, 75, 85, some back roads where traffickers never have to hit major interstates. And so they're using some of the small communities to get where they're going throughout the other states. So please keep that in mind. We talked about as far as the force and fraud. Making sure we also consider the other populations, male populations. A lot of times when we see trafficking, we think that it's just a female issue. Nope, males are trafficked as well. Your LGBTI community as well. Youth who are homeless. And then also our minority. As well. And those who may have physical, mental, or emotional disabilities are also have the opportunity to be preyed upon. So please keep that in mind. A reminder that traffickers can be anybody. They can look your coaches, some other parents, your child's friends' parents. So making sure we keep that line of communication open so we always know who our children are around. And if it doesn't look right, if it don't feel right, if it's something in your stomach, like something's just not right with that situation, say something. Contact the local law enforcement. We talked about the hotlines that are available. Say something, because the last thing you want to do is find out later that it was something and we didn't say anything. One more time, look at it. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure. Again, social media. I just want to touch on social media right quick. Making sure you know what apps your children are using, because our traffickers are using that to contact them. Being mindful of how, a lot of times we want to post everything. Being mindful, we had a trafficker that was able to determine a child's room in the house based off of them posting, because they posted their room. They posted when the sun was shining, different ways. So just being mindful of what you post, because that information can definitely be used to locate you. Or locate your kids. So just a reminder to that as well. And the final things, again, make sure we change our language, making sure that, again, we get training so we'll know more information. As we learn more information about human trafficking, it changes. Traffickers are being just as smart as law enforcement are trying to get information. So we have to stay ahead of the game. And we do that by making sure we make the community aware. But I do have some additional information out on the table, so if you have questions, I'll be happy to speak with you all afterwards as well. Thank you so very much.
Good evening. So my name is Maureen Wood, and I am the juvenile court judge here in Rockdale County, and I'm very grateful that we are having this event here in our community. I ditto and echo everything all the panelists have already told you all about trafficking. I want to tell you a little bit about the juvenile court because it's good for you all to know what's happening in the community and what resources you have. So in the juvenile court, there are different types of cases that we have jurisdiction to hear. And so those are cases that involve young people who have committed what, if they were adults, would be considered crimes. We call those delinquent offenses. If you are under the age of 17 and you commit a delinquent offense, then you would fall under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. If it is a day before your 17th birthday and up, you are considered an adult and you would be a part of the adult criminal system. So under the age of 17, juvenile court jurisdiction if you have committed an offense that would be considered a crime. The other types of cases that I hear are dependency and neglect cases. So when you think about, or when you hear the word defects, or when you hear the word foster care, here in the United States of America, we all have rights to raise our children without state interference. And so what that means, in order for a state agency to come into your home and remove your children from you, there has to be a legal proceeding that happens, and you have to have due process of the law. And you will find yourself in the juvenile court, and those children find themselves in the juvenile court. Our commissioners have made sure that our juvenile court has resources for both the delinquent youth as well as the abused and neglected youth, so that every child who comes through the juvenile court has an attorney who represents them, as well as a guardian ad litem who represents their best interests. With that being said, our abused and neglected population and our delinquent population are some of the most vulnerable young people when it comes to sex trafficking, CSEC. Additionally, there is a population that the juvenile court has jurisdiction over, and those are called CHINS youth, children in need of services. And those young people have done something that would be considered under the law a status offense. What a status offense means is if you were an adult, you couldn't get charged with a crime for doing it. So for example, if you are an adult and you don't show up to work, no one's going to swear out a warrant against you. No one's going to open up a court case. You just might lose your job. Well, for young people, when they are habitually and chronically truant from school, they can become subject to the jurisdiction of the juvenile court under CHINS. That also includes things like running away from home. As an adult, if you run away from home, people may miss you, people may wonder when you're coming back, but once again, no one's going to open up a court case for you and have you subject to the court because you ran away from home. For young people, that would fall up under the jurisdiction of the CHINS cases. And then there are other status offenses like just being unruly in general. If you are an adult and you are just a jerk to be around and people don't like to be around you at home, nobody's going to open up a court case. But in the juvenile court, those are the types of cases that the court sees. And so for our CHINS youth and for our delinquent youth and for our abused and neglected youth, this is a very vulnerable population to what we're talking about today, which is our human trafficking. I researched some statistics. The average age for a young person to come into trafficking is 12 years old. So oftentimes in our community, we look at our young people, and especially our African American and our brown and our people of color, oftentimes they are looked at as being older than they actually are, or more mature than they actually are. And that oftentimes becomes a problem, especially when they have been victimized. There was already a little bit of conversation about our vocabulary. As community members, I would challenge you all to take people to task when they are using vocabulary and words like fast or hot in the pants, or when they're describing young people, or when they are obviously treating a child like they are a grown woman or a grown man. That is one of the issues that we see in our communities, and I think it contributes to the way young people are treated when they are victims and the response that they get when they need services to be put in place for them. Some of the warning signs in your community that you should look for are young people who are running away from home, young people who are truant from school, young people who have multiple cell phones and you don't know where they're coming from or who's paying for them, young people who seem to have access to credit cards or gift cards or money, but they don't have a source of a job. If you see bags, if you see wigs, if you see shoes, and you're not sure where that's coming from or how they could do that, that is a warning sign. Also, older boyfriends. That is a warning sign. Also signs of physical abuse, scratches, burns, bruises, those types of things on young people, and then tattoos. And then finally, gang affiliation. So oftentimes we hear about young people and the boys being jumped into a gang. On the opposite side, you may hear about girls and them being sexed into a gang. The current atmosphere, and when I say the current atmosphere, I would think back to when we were teenagers, and I think images in the media and lyrics in songs and certain things can easily influence young people. That's the same today, just add social media on top of that. And so oftentimes you have young people who, it's already been spoken about, they don't necessarily view themselves as a victim because they believe they're engaging in behavior that they are willingly engaging in. If a young person is 15 years old, they cannot consent. If you are under the age of 15, you cannot consent. If you are 15 years old, you cannot consent to sexual activity, period. You are a victim, okay? The age of consent is 16 here in the state of Georgia. There's already been talk about what a trafficker looks like, and I'm not going to repeat that. I just want us to get that image of the white kidnapper van out of our head. Not to say that people are not abducted, because I think that's a very real thing, but when we're talking about what the dangers are in our own community, it's already been spoken about multiple times. They're sitting right in front of you. They're living right next door to you. They're going to school with your children. They're interacting with them on social media. So it's very important, the communication that you have with your children. The other thing is young people are oftentimes introduced into the life by friends or loved ones. I'm going to give a couple of examples, but before I do that, I just want to share with you all what we're doing in the juvenile court when a young person has been identified as being a victim of sex trafficking. We have a program called SOAR, which is Safety, Outreach, Assistance, and Resources for young people. And if a young person is court involved, whether they are on the delinquent side, so they may have involvement with the Department of Juvenile Justice, or if they are involved on the dependency and neglect side, they may be a foster youth or have been deemed abused and neglected and placed outside of their home, or if a young person is a CHINS youth, if they have been identified as someone who is being trafficked, has been trafficked, or there is a concern that they may be in that situation, they are placed on the SOAR calendar. So in addition to the regular court proceedings, we have special staffings for them to make sure there are no gaps in services that they're able to receive. So in addition to the mental health services that obviously would need to be put in place, there are services that we make sure that the young people have, like screenings for sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy screenings, education, connection to local resources, mentoring, and obviously the referral to your advocacy center when it calls for that as well. So we do have a program in place to make sure that the young people who come through our community and that are victims have resources available to them. One of the most important things that we have seen is making a strong connection with that young person, because oftentimes it will be their decision when they want to exit the life. Because, like I said, so many people do not view themselves as victims. They view themselves as willingly making choices to either better their situation or gain income or gain status. And so oftentimes it takes a scary situation, an act of violence, or something for them to wake up and say, I don't want this anymore. And when they're ready to exit, they need to have somebody to call. And so that is what's so important about the programs that we have. We try to make as many connections with the young people so that they have someone to call. I wanted to just talk about a couple of hypothetical situations that are very real. For our foster youth and our unhoused youth, oftentimes young people are able to exit out of foster care at the age of 18, but because they do not have homes and families, they find themselves unhoused. It's very easy to fall victim because of the lack of resources and the lack of access to things that they have. If you couple that with coming from a household where you've lacked resources, you have not had love, and you don't know what that looks like. Someone looks really appealing when they are offering love to you, and they're offering resources to you, and they're offering housing to you, and where you've grown up in a situation where you've already felt like you're staying there because someone's receiving a check, or the people that are interacting with you and looking after you are doing that because it's their job. And so we already have young people who are already vulnerable because of the situations that they found themselves in. And so that is a recipe for disaster. So if you know a young person who is in foster care, if you know a young person who is right now going through the court system and it looks like they could use some support, I would encourage you to reach out. If you could find it in your heart to find extra time to volunteer, to be a CASA, like a court-appointed special advocate, or even to look into the process of being a foster parent. That would also be great for our young people. Our teenagers oftentimes are placed in group homes, and they are not placed in family-like settings when they come into foster care. And so what that means is they are even more vulnerable to being trafficked because of the group home setting, and other young people who with like experiences and like trauma. And then finally, I want to just bring it back, and I've run out of my time, so I just wanted to talk about some of the things that our young people glamorize that easily can lead to trafficking. And so one example would be I'll call them sex careers, but they're not necessarily sex careers. Cocktail waitress, your stripper. Now, they didn't have them when I was coming up, but your bottle girls, those types of things. Those are very appealing type careers for young ladies because they see they're beautiful women, they see the money that's involved with it, they see the glamorization, whether it be through their music or through social media, and they see a way to make money, but oftentimes the lifestyle and the crowds that come with that make them ripe for being exposed to trafficking and being victims themselves. And then finally, it's already been touched upon, but because I have seen it on more than one occasion, oftentimes when a young person is being trafficked and they want to get out, one of the easiest ways for them to get out is to move up. And what I mean by move up is to recruit someone else. And so the easiest place to recruit someone would probably be school or your detention center. And so oftentimes, young people who have a history of running away from home. I had a situation where a child ran away from home a lot, and so on one situation, they ran away from home and were literally held against their will for a week, more than a week. And when they came back home, the parent didn't think anything about it, because they were so used to that child running away. And when I say the parent didn't think anything about it, the parent didn't think anything about the child being gone for a week. And that child had been through such a horrible experience. And really just the trauma of being gone and nobody looking for them because they had created this pattern for themselves just made them even more vulnerable to go back to that situation. And then I've had a situation where a young person has gotten into the life and wanted to get out, but because of the connections that they had made, these people knew where they lived, they knew where they went to school, they knew who their family was, and so that threat of if you leave, it's not just you that's in danger, but your entire family, that intimidation and that threat was very real for that young person. We were able to get that young person moved outside of the community, and that young person is doing much better. But it was a very hard road. And the reason why it was a hard road is because those threats and those intimidation tactics are very real to them, and they oftentimes find themselves in really horrible situations. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Good evening, everyone. I'm always nervous when I have to speak. Okay. So first, I want to thank you for inviting me to be on this panel amongst just these group of women who have a very extensive background in human trafficking. So as Melissa mentioned, I am more so from a transportation perspective when it comes to human trafficking. So if you don't know, the Georgia Department of Driver Services has a CDO, Human Trafficking Education and Outreach Program. And that program was awarded to DDS from a grant with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And that federal agency pretty much oversees all the commercial motor vehicles on the road. So the core of what I do is I travel throughout the state, and sometimes I go outside of the state as well, but I travel throughout the state and I talk to commercial motor vehicle stakeholders, so your CDL schools, truck drivers, companies, organizations, anything that relates to commercial motor vehicles. And I give training on human trafficking and how it intersects with transportation.
Places such as gas stations, truck stops, motels. They're not as popular today, but those massage parlors that would be on the road, as well as gas stations. These are areas that traffickers, they pinpoint these areas because they are isolated. They are in rural communities. They have low law enforcement, and they have a transient customer base where you have customers coming in and out. So they scout these areas, and these areas, the most common form of human trafficking that you're going to see is outdoor solicitation. Also, one of the things that I talk about in my training, I'm sure maybe you have heard of the term lot lizard. So when people think of lot lizards, they just think of women out there, and men as well, just selling themselves, and they consider them prostitutes. But when I'm talking to truck drivers, I let them know that there was a point in time when drugs were at these locations, and that's where the drugs were, and that's where the term lot lizard came to be. So when you think about these things, people think that with prostitution, they just have this belief or this belief that women and men are just out here exploiting their bodies. But as we talked about earlier, they don't think about the risk factors and the vulnerabilities that they have as far as the substance abuse, homelessness. Traffickers, they scout locations such as bus stops, train stations, the subways. We have the MARTA. So when you think about how human trafficking affects transportation, well, traffickers, they use the transportation to recruit their victims. Like I said, bus stops, train stations. They use transportation to control their victims. They use transportation to move their victims. And they use transportation to deliver victims to their customers. So as a transportation personnel and as an employee, I like to highlight just how it intersects with human trafficking. So being here today, and we talked about how human trafficking affects communities, I want to bring awareness to how it can happen in the transportation industry. As we mentioned earlier, we have the airport, the largest airport in the world. We have I-20, you have 75, you have 85. We border Florida, South Carolina, so many states with quick exits when you think about the transportation industry. So I know that it can be overlooked because a lot of times when you hear human trafficking, people only think about sex trafficking. And a part of what we're doing today with this forum is bringing awareness to human trafficking as a way of sex trafficking and labor trafficking as well, bringing attention to that. And also one of the things that I mentioned in my training, people like to confuse or interchange human trafficking with human smuggling. And what many people don't know is that although transportation can be an act of human trafficking, people can be trafficked without leaving their homes, without leaving out the state or leaving out of the city. And when people think of human smuggling, they think that that's human trafficking. And human trafficking is a crime against a person, whereas human smuggling is a crime against a border. So when I'm talking to transportation stakeholders, truck drivers, I also mention how a human smuggling victim can become a human trafficking victim. Say you come into the country, you're undocumented, you don't have anything. At that point, you have become dependent on your smuggler, who is now your trafficker. And there are cases where truck drivers also facilitate human smuggling and human trafficking when they transport those victims across borders. Trucks, they're large. They can get through these checkpoints undetected. The case that happened just last year in Texas, where those 50+ immigrants died, in that truck driver was a part of that human smuggling process. They help facilitate that. And any time that a truck driver becomes a part of that process, you are a part of the problem. A lot of times you have truck drivers, they want that money, $20,000, $10,000. They see it as a big payout or a cash reward. So if you don't know what you're doing and you continue to commit that crime, how do we end it? How do we curb it? How do we stop it? So a lot of times what I like to tell people when I do speak is there was just a period of time where I was just like you, a part of the audience. I was aware of what human trafficking was. I heard it before, but I really didn't know what it was until I got in this position and was introduced to human trafficking. By attaining seminars, conferences, speaking with human trafficking victims and hearing their stories, I learned what human trafficking is and what human trafficking is not. Like we mentioned, many people, a part of what I do is outreach. When I'm not doing trainings, I'm doing outreach, like what I'm doing today. I go out in the communities, and I cannot tell you how many times people come up to me and mention kidnapping as what they believe human trafficking to be. People think human trafficking only happens to women. They don't think that human trafficking happens to U.S. citizens. They think that it happens to people who are not from here, not from this country. They don't think that it happens to men. They don't think that it happens to boys. And also the forgotten community, the LGBTQ+. People don't look at them as victims. People don't really pay attention to the minorities as well, Hispanic, Asian, African American. So when I do my trainings in the transportation community, it's really important to me to pretty much hone in how transportation is impacted by human trafficking. So I have some informational goodie bags that I brought for you all today. And if you have any questions, please, we are all here. Please take advantage of the panel that is here today. There really is no dumb question. There is no silly question. Whatever question you have about human trafficking, this is the time to ask for it. When we talk about what you can do to help combat human trafficking, the first step is becoming aware of what it is. If we don't become aware of what it is, whenever that false information is out there, then it just spreads. How many people seen that TikTok video where the person was on the MARTA? Did y'all see that? Well, okay. There is this video going around of this young woman. She is on the train and she's recording these men who are looking at her, and she's saying that they're using hand signals, and it's going around as human trafficking. And that creates this fear that basically that's what human trafficking is. You can be on a subway, you can be on a train, and anyone can be looking at you and seem suspicious, and that's human trafficking. And it creates this fear that you can't even ride a subway station and go home or go to work because you're going to be trafficked. So when we have forums like this, bring those things up so that it can be properly addressed, because there is a huge difference between someone plotting to traffic you versus someone maybe plotting to rob you. So if you don't know the difference, or you don't know the real signs and the real indicators, stuff like that, it goes on social media and it spreads like fire. And then by the time that we get to this point to kind of address what it is, people already have in their mind that that's what human trafficking is. So please take this moment to, whatever questions you have, just answer it. So, ask them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So at this time, we have a few questions for some students that we're going to ask. So panelists, please join in. This is a question from a student. Who can I call if I know someone falling victim to human trafficking? Who can I call? This is a question from a student. Who can I call if I know of someone falling victim to human trafficking?
Who can they call?
Who can they call?
Is it a student under the age of,
So this is a student that
Asked the question?
asked the question.
if they are under the age of 18, they can call the CSEC response team just to get initial information, but they also want to probably call their local law enforcement as well to go ahead and file a police report, and they can refer them to us as well.
Thank you. How can we help victims who are too afraid to go to the police for help?
I think part of that, one of the things that we do for the Department of Juvenile Justice is just let them know that it's not required for them to speak right then. We try to get them assistance. We have worked with, as I said, other organizations within the state. So maybe if they don't want to talk to us at the detention center, then we'll reach out to CACGA. We'll reach out to other avenues. But again, just making sure they know that they're always able. We've had victims that they came in through intake and it was, a week later, they're like, okay, I'm ready to talk now. And we were ready to listen. So just being available to listen whenever they're ready to talk, you're ready to listen, and like I said, have your poker face on because you may be very surprised on what they tell you. And then try to get them assistance immediately. As I said, we've been able to work very closely with the CACGAs, and as soon as we call, Naisha as well as Brittany and others, as soon as we call, they step in and start getting us assistance as well.
What are the main locations where citizens are most trafficked?
From the schools, where people gather, the malls, the skating rings now, the jump places. People groom, social media. A lot of times these traffickers, it's not that, I see Brittany, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna talk to Brittany, I'm gonna traffic her. No, I'm gonna start talking to Brittany maybe 6 months beforehand. I'm gonna grow a relationship with her. So then when I invite her out, she doesn't think I'm her friend. Oh, I can go out with Debaja, that's fine. So again, it's a grooming process, so it may start anywhere.
Okay. How are traffickers brought to justice within our legal system?
Is that me?
So I'm really big on talking about everyone's rights, and so that would be a crime, a criminal offense, or a delinquent offense, depending on the age of the perpetrator, and they would go through the same process as any person who's been accused of a crime would go through, and have the opportunity to assert their innocence and be proven guilty in a court of law beyond reasonable doubt, and then they would be sentenced. And I think minimum 20 years usually for those adult trafficking offenses. And so,
Thank you.
yeah.
What are the consequences, I guess this is for you, Kayla, what are the consequences for a CDL driver involved in trafficking?
Okay, so you have the federal law, No Human Trafficking on Our Roads Act, and that pretty much bans anyone who use a commercial motor vehicle to commit human trafficking or smuggling from operating a commercial motor vehicle for life. Also in the state of Georgia in 2020, Governor Kemp passed HB 823, and it pretty much parallels that federal law. So anyone found to have used a commercial motor vehicle to commit human trafficking is banned from operating a commercial motor vehicle, a lifetime ban.
Thank you. What role does technology play in human trafficking?
I was gonna say, I'll start off saying everything. As we talked about earlier, traffickers are evolving and adapting with technology, especially with COVID, with everyone being inside. The rate and the increase of going online has started to grow. You have traffickers who are using these game apps and these chat rooms, and they are disguising themselves as children, as minors. Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, everything is pretty much a playground for traffickers. So unfortunately, as technology continually evolves, so will traffickers' tactics.
And I think what we found is that a lot of times they're charmers. As again, they will start grooming very early on. They also pay attention to what you post. So if you have a young person that says, ooh, I hate my mom, or, I'm so ugly, and then that person is saying, no, you're beautiful. So those types of things are laying the foundation to have them to leave home on their own, or to meet them out on their own. So again, just knowing that sometimes they're charmers. As she said, the gaming systems, a lot of times with, I think, like Fortnite and those types of things, they're trying to pay for their skins. So this person may offer to pay, and then in exchange, please send me a picture, or it's just a simple picture. And then it gets more and more. So again, they groom and they charm.
What is the youngest age you've seen involved in trafficking? The youngest age.
You all get them.
So like it was mentioned earlier, the average age that we're seeing is ages 12 to 14. However, we're seeing ages as young as, and my colleague may be able to speak to this better than I will, but I believe it's around the age of 4 years old is the youngest I have seen personally.
Okay. What can we do to give support to survivors?
Listen. That's the main thing, is just be a support. Don't interrogate. A lot of times we want to ask, well, what happened? When did it happen? How many times? Just listen. Allow them to open up as they feel comfortable. And as I said, that may happen that day, but that may happen a month from now. We have to build trust. That's the other thing, that these traffickers have built trust with them. So therefore, it's going to be hard to trust anyone else. I can't just come in and say, well, I'm Miss Coleman, I'm here to help you. Well, that's what the last person said as well. So just be available to continue to show up as well, because many times they've been so disappointed by individuals. So just continue to be there. If you say you're going to be there, be there. If you say you're going to come and visit, or you're going to be at their game, or whatever it may be, make sure you're there. Don't disappoint. So, and being able to just listen.
I think another important thing is to make people understand that you're not judging them. Everyone's afraid to be judged. And so if you create a safe environment when it comes to that, people will be more apt, more likely to speak to you and open up to you over time.
I would encourage you to advocate for resources here in your own community. We have a local nonprofit, For Sarah, that reaches out and offers hope to victims. But oftentimes what I see is there is a disconnect as it relates to the amount of resources in our more rural area. And we're metro now, right? We're not country Rockdale anymore in terms of, how far we've come in a very short period of time. But the reality of the situation is the level of resources and the level of support that there may be in the city of Atlanta or Fulton County are unmatched to communities that just do not have as much. And so when you're looking for a lifeline, oftentimes how convenient is it for you to be able to get the help that you need. So as community members, advocating for resources and supporting the resources that you do have in the community, so that when victims are ready, they don't have to go too far.
Well, I would like to personally thank all of our panelists today, but if you had one final thought that you would like to leave with the citizens, what would that be?
Be aware. Awareness, I think, is the first big step for us as a community. Just watch, just be aware. If something doesn't seem right, as some of the other panelists have said, say something. And I think we live in an environment now where that word of advice kind of goes across all topics. If you see something, say something. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. And people will say, well, it's none of my business. Well, yes and no, right? Ultimately, it ends up being all of our business, because even if it doesn't affect you directly, it may affect a family member of yours or a neighbor of yours.
I would just say remain open-minded. the types of trafficking are constantly evolving and how we're seeing trafficking happen. Constantly be on guard, ready to learn more knowledge and be able to share that knowledge, just so everyone in the community is aware of kind of the dangers involved in the community.
I would say educate yourself, educate others, as I said earlier. The more we talk about it, the more we have the correct information and share that correct information. And there's a number of websites from federal to state that are available to you. So look up that information. Don't let it end here as you walk out the door. And you don't learn anything else until next year at this time. Stay aware, stay a learner.
I don't know if it was mentioned, but Georgia does have a human trafficking hotline. I believe the number is 1-866-NHT Georgia. So even if you are witnessing something and you are unsure if it's trafficking, you can call that number and report what you are seeing. There are operators that are trained to walk through it with you. So just be aware of hotlines that are out there. You have the nonprofit hotlines as well, but I just want to mention that there is a state hotline that you can call as well as a national hotline. So even if you are unsure that what you're seeing is human trafficking, you can still call.
I would say don't give up on or dismiss your troubled youth. Oftentimes, behaviors that look like unruly behaviors, something that may present itself as ADHD or extreme mental health issues, could actually be a trauma response. And so paying attention, not being so quick to dismiss or to judge our young people, because they really are going through a lot, and oftentimes you just cannot tell just by looking. So giving some grace, try not to dismiss, and try to figure out a way to advocate for young people in the community. And that can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean your time. It could mean your money. It could mean using your voice. It could look so many different ways. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Well, speaking of using your voice, I definitely like to thank our Board of Commissioners. We have a very supportive Board of Commissioners in Rockdale County. As I stated before, human trafficking is one of those topics that no one wants to speak about. It's not popular, right? It doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy. So I'm so happy that we had a panel that was willing to come and share their expertise with us today. Thank you so much for joining us in Rockdale County. But I would like to thank, we have one of our commissioners here. Commissioner Washington, would you like to say any words?
Thank you all for coming. Share the information. Share the information to your church members, your neighbors, your homeowners associations, your sorority, fraternity, lodges. This is valuable information because it could be your child or your grandchild or your niece or nephew. And we all have to come together to combat this. That's it. Thank you. Thank you all for coming and gracing our county with all of this information.